The summer had always been a busy time at our countryside home. Family members would visit. The garden would buzz with laughter, and I'd find myself cooking for a small army of relatives. This year, my nephew Ethan decided to stay for a month. At 24, he was no longer the little boy I remembered. He had grown into a tall, confident man, with an air of independence that reminded me of his late father. My brother, Ethan, had come to help me with the farm after hearing about my struggles. My husband Martin had taken a long work trip abroad, and I couldn't keep up with the endless chores. Ethan's offer to assist was a relief, and I was grateful for the company. He arrived with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a warm, boyish grin. "Thanks for letting me stay, Aunt Clara," he said, hugging me at the door. "It's good to see you, Ethan." "You're a lifesaver," I replied. We quickly fell into a routine. During the day, we'd work side by side in the fields, weeding, harvesting, and repairing fences. Ethan was full of energy and ideas, always eager to take on the hardest tasks. In the evenings, we'd sit on the porch, talking about everything, from his college experiences to my childhood memories with his father. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, Ethan brought out an old photo album he had found in the attic. He flipped through the pages with a mix of curiosity and nostalgia. "Look at this one," he said, holding up a picture of me in my 20s. I was standing next to his father, both of us grinning ear to ear after winning a local horse race. "You were so carefree back then." I laughed. Life was simpler than your dad and I had quite the adventures. Ethan studied the photo for a moment longer before looking at me. "You still have that spark, you know," he said softly. "You just hide it behind all the responsibilities." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. I smiled awkwardly and changed the subject, pointing out a picture of him as a toddler in his father's arms. The tension passed, but the comment lingered in my mind. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease from the previous evening. Ethan's comment was innocent. I told myself he was just being kind. Maybe nostalgic. Still, I couldn't help but feel a slight shift in the atmosphere between us. We spent the day repairing a section of the barn roof that had been damaged during a storm. The work was hard, but Ethan approached it with enthusiasm. "Pass me the hammer, Aunt Clara," he said, leaning over the edge of the ladder. His sleeves were rolled up, his arms streaked with dust and sweat. He reminded me so much of his father at that age, hardworking, charming and full of life. By late afternoon, we had finished the repairs. Ethan insisted on cleaning up the tools while I prepared dinner. As I stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables, I heard him humming a tune from the living room. The sound was comforting, filling the house with a warmth that had been missing since Martin left. As we sat down to eat, Ethan suddenly turned serious. "Aunt Clara, can I ask you something?" I looked up from my plate, sensing the weight in his voice. Of course he hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck? Like life has become routine?" His question hit close to home. I took a sip of water, buying myself time. "I suppose we all feel that way at times," I said cautiously. "Why do you ask?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately. He used to tell me stories about how the two of you dreamed of traveling the world, chasing adventures, but you never did. I guess I just wonder, do you ever regret not chasing those dreams?" His words opened a door I hadn't wanted to walk through in years. I felt a pain of sadness as I thought about my younger self, full of ambition and wanderlust. Sometimes I admitted quietly, but life has a way of leading us down different paths. Your dad and I made choices, and we lived with them. Ethan nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "You deserve more, Aunt Clara," he said after a pause. "You spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself." The intensity in his voice took me by surprise, and I felt a flush rise to my cheeks. "That's sweet of you to say, Ethan, but I'm fine," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. He didn't press further, but his words stayed with me long after the meal was over. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself replaying our conversation. It wasn't just what he had said. It was the way he had looked at me, as if he saw something in me I had long forgotten. The following days passed with a strange mix of normalcy and tension. Ethan and I continued our chores, working side by side as always, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. His words had stirred something within me, a longing I had buried long ago. One evening, after a particularly long day tending to the animals, Ethan suggested we take a walk down to the river. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fields, and the idea of a peaceful stroll was too tempting to resist. We walked in comfortable silence at first, the crunch of gravel under our feet and the chirping of crickets filling the air. When we reached the riverbank, Ethan skipped a few stones across the water, his movements relaxed and unhurried. "You always loved this spot," he said, turning to me. "Dad used to say it was your favorite place to think." I smiled, watching the ripples spread across the surface of the water. "It still is. There's something calming about it." Ethan sat down on a large rock, motioning for me to join him. "You've given so much to this family, Aunt Clara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Sometimes I think you've forgotten how to just be you." I looked at him, startled by the intensity in his eyes. "Ethan, where is all this coming from?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He shrugged, glancing back at the water. "I guess I've just been thinking a lot since I got here. You've always been like a second mom to me, and I admire you so much, but I can't help feeling like you're holding yourself back." His words struck a chord, and I felt my defenses faltering. "It's not that simple," I said quietly. "Life isn't just about chasing dreams. It's about responsibilities, commitments. It's about making choices and sticking to them." Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But what if those choices don't make you happy anymore? Shouldn't you have the chance to change them?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked away, focusing on the river's steady flow. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying with it a silence that felt heavy with unspoken truths. After a while, Ethan reached out, his hand brushing mine lightly. "I'm sorry if I'm out of line," he said softly. "I just want you to know you deserve to be happy, and Clara. That's all." His touch lingered for a moment too long, and I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. I stood abruptly, brushing off my skirt. "We should head back," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "It's getting late." Ethan looked at me, his expression unreadable. Before nodding, "Yeah, you're right." As we walked back to the house, the air between us felt charged. The easy camaraderie of earlier, replaced by a tension I couldn't ignore. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking, that Ethan's concern was just that, concern. But deep down, I knew there was something more. And it scared me. The tension that had been simmering finally came to a head. The next evening after dinner, Ethan suggested we sit on the porch. The sky was clear and the stars were scattered like diamonds above us. I reluctantly agreed, hoping the cool night air would help clear my thoughts. We sat in silence for a while, the creak of the rocking chair and the occasional chirp of a cricket, the only sounds I could feel Ethan's gaze on me. But I avoided meeting his eyes, focusing instead on the dark horizon and Clara. he said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. I need to tell you something. I turned to him, bracing myself. What is it? He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I feel like I see you in a way that others don't. You're strong, caring, and beautiful. I've always admired you, but now being here with you, it's different. His words hung in the air, and I felt my heart pound in my chest. Ethan, I began, my voice shaky. You're my nephew, what you're saying. I know, he interrupted, his tone urgent. I know it's wrong to feel this way, but I can't pretend I don't. You've been more than family to me. Aunt Clara, you've been a guiding light, someone I can talk to about anything. And now, I don't know, it's confusing. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the wooden porch. Ethan, you need to stop, I said firmly. Whatever this is, it's not right. You're young, and you're probably just feeling lost after everything with your dad. But this isn't the way to cope. He stood too, his expression a mix of frustration and sadness. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to upset you. I had to be honest. I shook my head, willing myself to stay calm. I appreciate your honesty, but we can't have this conversation again. You're like a son to me, Ethan. That's all you'll ever be. Ethan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. I understand, he said, his voice barely audible. I'll keep my distance. We stood there for a moment longer, the night air heavy between us. Finally, I turned and walked inside, my chest tight with a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. Over the next few days, Ethan kept his promise. He remained polite and helpful, but the warmth and ease between us were gone. When his stay came to an end, I felt a strange sense of loss. Despite everything that had happened, as I watched him drive away, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd handle things the right way. Maybe he was just a young man, grappling with emotions he didn't fully understand. Or maybe I had allowed myself to get too close, blurring lines that should have remained clear. Whatever the truth, I knew one thing for certain. Some doors once opened could never be closed completely. And though I would never admit it, a part of me would always carry the memory of that summer, and the nephew who saw me in a way no one else ever had.